Welcome to the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. The pandemic reminded us how important it is for organizations to be able to maximize their profit. And it reminded us that the way you do that is by optimizing your people first culture. So living a revenue culture is that combination of you're never going to make your most money unless you have your best people first culture. And that's what this series is dedicated to. Today, we have Matt Hensler with us. Matt's he and I have been friends and worked together for about 6 years now. And when I think of going to the dictionary and looking up Chief Revenue Officer, I see Matt's picture there. But he's been a VP of marketing. He's been in sales. He's been in product creation. He's been in biz dev. And he's been in big organizations and startups and technology, and he's really covered the waterfront. And one of the things that excites me about Matt is he's one of those people who sees the big picture and not a kind of a mercenary big picture and how do we get as much money out of the pockets of customers as possible, but how do we create the greatest amount of value for all the players. And he not only sees that picture, but he knows how to manage a team to help them get there. So with that, and today, Matt's with Imaging Brands, and we're going to ask him to talk a little bit about that today as well. But first, I want to welcome you, Matt. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Rick. I'm very excited, always excited to talk to you about revenue science and culture. And so I'm very excited to just actually have one of our conversations recorded, and hopefully other people take as much value from it as I always do.
Well, good. I know we're going to have some fun. And, I gave him a little background on you, but I would love to have you kind of share your journey to where you are today with Imaging Brands. And then we'll kind of go into some of the learnings from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a majority of my career was spent in marketing agencies, first in the Midwest, where I'm from in Wisconsin, and then ventured out to Arizona and was established at a marketing firm here for many years. And while I was there, I started out on the account side, eventually was more focused on research and brand development, and did a lot of planning for clients. At one point, I sort of made a leap and joined a software startup. I was the fourth member of a founding team, and that SaaS startup was where I got introduced to the concept of customer success, and I headed up their customer success practice. And so that gave me a really well-rounded view of the customer journey, because it had always, for many years of my career, was focused on that front end marketing experience. And then it was during that time at the startup that I was introduced to revenue science and and your teachings, Rick. And so it was profound for me for a number of reasons and learnings that I took into my day-to-day in customer success and my interactions with the rest of the organization. When I left there, was CMO of a national real estate brokerage, and then did some consulting before I landed in my current role as head of marketing for Imaging Brands, which is an organization that produces products for professional photographers and videographers.
Wow, that's quite a journey. Now, one of the things you and I talked about the other day as we were going through your journey and some of the learnings, you brought up something I don't think I've ever had anybody else talk to me about, and I was absolutely fascinated and want to hear more. And that's the concept, from our standpoint, we always talk about purpose, and you added a new dimension to that. You talked about the worldview coming before the purpose. Would you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is one of the things I've always looked for in my career, is how do I make my career a collection of experiences? And I kind of consider myself a sponge, and probably was a sociologist in another life, right, where I'm just kind of observing and taking things in, because I just think in every situation there's something to be learned. And one of the meetings that I had that where we were talking about CRO thinking and revenue science, there was a speaker named Chris Westfall, and Chris, I guess, is known for being one of the top rated like pitch people in business. He trains a lot of the Shark Tank organizations who are going on the show to really hone their pitch. And he kind of took us through an exercise and a lot of familiar themes because I've been a brand strategist most of my career. But one of the things that he said was that branding is a lot about a balance between what's known and what's new. And as I thought about that, it made me think, what's that bridge for people between what they know, right? What's comfortable for them, and then what's new to them? How do they grow that comfort? And I think, as people, we're really, prone to connection, and you see that in business now. A lot of organizations talking about human first, and there's just more of a sense of humanity in business, or at least a lot of companies who are trying to build that into their business interactions. And as I've thought more about the concept of mission, vision, values, or purpose within an organization, I really think that in order for people to get to your purpose and to understand your purpose, first there has to be a premise, right? A reason why that purpose is valid and relevant. And that's where I've really spent a lot of time thinking about what's the worldview of the organization? What's the belief system that has formed their thinking as to why this new product or their existing product really fits within the marketplace, and why it brings value to people. And I think a lot of the conversations around brand and around purpose need to start with what's that worldview, that thinking, and that set of beliefs, which then kind of creates a premise through which that purpose can take hold, right? And purpose being like, what's that thing you're doing every day to change the world in your own way as a business? And so with that, I've really started to kind of craft into my own brand consulting and brand work, what is that worldview? And that's kind of a starting point. And once we have that, purpose and brand position and company culture, it all cascades down. And I did a really great and worthwhile consulting contract between two firms a couple of years ago, two agencies that were looking to merge. And we sort of followed this thought process. And, the premise was really kind of went back to the tenets of marketing, right? And being a marketing firm, what does that mean? And we sort of tore apart the word to its core definition. And when you look at marketing as defined, it literally is almost everything to do with business. It's buying and selling, it's movement of goods. And so, part of the premise is that, we believe that marketing is meant to be at the core of the business in order to align the entire business from start to finish to its customers. And, from there, part of our purpose was to get companies to walk the walk of being customer centric, right? And take those bold leaps and make those really critical and important moves that help them deliver tremendous customer value, that have customers coming back. And you mentioned, I try not to be within my style of marketing. It is very much oriented towards connection. And when I was agency side doing business development along with the team, I would always explain that our job is to help you find more customers that can benefit from your products and services. And your job as the client is to have products and services that people can actually benefit from, right? And it was kind of creating this environment of mutual accountability and to get them to understand that we're not going to be an organization that, is going to be focused on, clickbait or bait and switch or trying to overinflate, the experience people would ultimately have with buying product or services. Because and as we know in revenue science and CRO thinking, that just dooms your business when they come to you with one understanding and then have a different experience. It doesn't create that scalable, profitable revenue that every business is looking for.
Yeah, Matt, there's a couple of things in there that are really, really interesting to me. The way you described the worldview, it 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 made it easy for organizations to start thinking from the buyer's frame of reference backwards. Often when I talk to people about, well, tell me what your purpose is, uh, I think we've been conditioned to, well, my purpose is to make a lot of money, or my purpose is to grow, or my purpose is to do some of those things. And I go, time out, no, no. You want to do this from the buyer's frame of reference backwards. But they have a hard time making that jump. But when you talk about the worldview, it's almost impossible to jump from a question about worldview to your personal short-term outcomes that you want. So I really like that as a way to start a different conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think similarly, while as many companies say that, they're in business to make money, or that might be the starting point for them, um, too often now, organizations try to create too much altruism around what they do. And, that can't be the case for every single company that exists. And it's okay for your purpose to not necessarily be sort of this overarching, you know, idea around how you improve humanity. It might be a piece of that, right? It might just be, for something like Gatorade, it might just be you're hydrating people so that they can perform their best, right? That's a really important purpose, but they're not trying to overinflate their role in the world in solving humanity's problems, right? We're not all intended to do that. We can all kind of do have our kind of niche in our piece of making the world better, but it doesn't have to be something that's sweeping, going to improve all of humanity in totality.
Absolutely. If I make machine tools, I don't necessarily have to be saving the whales at the same time.
Right, there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah,
There's a very valid purpose for making machine tools to make better products and better society and a safer world and all kinds of things. But and those are highly purposeful by themselves. So
yeah,
the other thing, after our talk the other day, uh, you know, one of the things I talk to people about all the time is setting expectations, for an organization is so important. And most of the time, candidly, that gets ignored. The expectations, instead of being set at an organizational level that align to, your worldview and your purpose, often the expectations are managed at individual levels of an individual salesperson, or a face-to-face contact at a trade show, or a call from an outbound marketing, or the inbound person receiving the call. They go and set expectations, and nobody's ever talked to them about what the organizational expectations
yeah.
are. So as I thought about our call, one of the things I think you do well, and marketing should be in the absolute forefront of, is first identifying what those expectations are to be set, and then having a way to intentionally, repeatedly set those. First, any thoughts about that? And then if you have ways that you help people do that, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, they're definitely. I think that alignment is critical. And in my time um, focused day to day on customer success, I sort of was just a student of what that practice within business was really evolving to become. And I think that concept really is reverse engineering value from the customer's perspective. And there are organizations like Gainsight, which kind of really was the first one to kind of adopt that concept and align it to software and try to deliver that consistently out in the marketplace. It's really not just about in the end is about customer outcomes, right? But they're also in an effort to really rally around the whole organization around customer outcomes. figuring out how the experience of the customer is getting pulled back into sales and pulled back into marketing, so that there is this consistent pre-sales and post-sale experience that uh, delivers on the value that the customer is expecting, but then also yields, the business growth that the company is wanting to achieve. And so, whether I think if for as long as you've been talking about these concepts, Rick, the world is really accelerated in moving this direction. And for my own style of marketing and just practicing um, business, it's been really encouraging for me because but it all does start with that alignment. And that's one of the things I really focus on early on in working with any organization. It's what do we do to get everybody rowing in the same direction? And what are those themes that we're getting people to rally around? Do they know it consistently? Are we reiterating that at every single touch point? How does that then transcend the idea that formed in the executive team all the way down through every single touch point in the organization, and then out to the marketplace? And again, going back to some of my experience as consulting with organizations, there are a couple of components that I think become really critical. I had a really brand strategist who I admire once tell me, the role of brand strategy is to sort of be this counterweight to the business strategy. And you can have, and those things have to live in harmony. And so at any point you feel like the business strategy is not aligned to the brand strategy, and it's out of balance, it's something you have to address. Similarly, if the brand strategy is out of alignment with the business strategy, you have to address that, right? So if an idea comes up and somebody says, hey, and last year was a great example of this. There was a lot of organizations reflecting on themselves and saying, do we pivot or do we not? How do we, find a way to exist in, these trying times as a business? And that was the greatest opportunity for companies to say, if I need to change my business strategy, my brand and and how my brand helps deliver, create expectations and deliver expectations, needs to adjust, and vice versa. It might be, this is the brand and we're sure about that, and as a result, some of these other ideas become distractions for us delivering on the brand that we have. And once you sort of establish that, it's not that hard to get it infiltrated to every single aspect of the organization. And I've been in situations where we look at, how does all of that exist in the operational structure, and how we support the customer experience from marketing to sales and all the way through every aspect of delivery. We create charters by department. What's their purpose for existing? How do they reflect the worldview and fulfill on the purpose? And we look at, how do we assign them a functional impact against that purpose, and how do we give them a revenue impact against that purpose, so that everybody sees, I'm not just putting the, even in my own organization, we have a warehouse team, and it's more about just putting something into a box, right? It's like, we realize revenue when that box ships. And so, really, they're the people who are generating all the revenue in the most, like, kind of critically way to define it. And we want them to understand that impact. And, that all creates accountability throughout the organization. It creates a sense of ownership and understanding what their role is within that bigger picture. And, not only does that create the alignment, it helps manage the expectations. People just tend to have a lot more fun doing it because the collaboration becomes easier. There's always sort of that default to look to help guide your decision making, where you start to remove the opinion and make all of the decisions as objective as possible.
Well, Matt, I love that immensely, and I first have to comment briefly on your analysis of during the pandemic, when people were sitting there pivoting. And I think pivoting is not my favorite business activity, because pivoting normally means you didn't have a brand strategy to begin with, and you were in an opportunistic environment, and the pandemic ended the opportunistic opportunity, And so now you got to say, oh my gosh, I can't do what I did yesterday. What do I do tomorrow? But the people who
Yeah.
had a solid brand strategy that had, now I'll use your language, had a worldview behind it, they knew where they were going. They may have to change the step today, but they're not changing the direction. They're not changing the
Yeah.
purpose. It's just we're going to go out, and in some cases that meant they scaled like crazy because the pandemic created a situation where whatever they did is now at demand 3 times what it was before. And in other cases, we're just going to move slower until the pandemic passes, and then we're just going to keep doing the purpose we were on to before. So,
Yeah, Rick, I think the first time I ever met you, you talked about this idea of the cost of chaos, right? And if scalable and profitable revenue is the goal of any organization, you have to look at what gets in the way of that. And, the chaos that exists in organizations due to the lack of alignment, the lack of discipline, the lack of focus has a huge cost. And no one takes the time really to quantify that. And when you do, it's startling. And I've sort of defined it in another way and talk about the difference between opportunity and opportunity cost. Right? There's a ton of great ideas. That doesn't mean you can pursue each one. It's different when you have an early stage startup and they're trying to find that product market fit, and they have some a small feature set, and they're really focused on getting some users and getting some adoption and getting feedback. And oftentimes where they start's not where they finish, right? And that's okay. And I think that's how the world generally defines organizations as pivoting. But I think you're right. I mean, I heard you say before, when you pivot, you end up in the same place, right? And so it's really got to be more thoughtful and disciplined than that. And we kind of experienced this in our own business last year. I mentioned earlier, we are an organization that provides hard goods mainly to professional photographers and videographers. And there were some, when everybody started working from home and learning from home and exercising from home, there's definitely gear that we have that can be utilized in those applications. And there were a lot of ideas swirling about how we can try to kind of capture that opportunity. And I had to stop and say, but that's not who we are as a brand, right? And we don't have the resources to create those audiences in a substantive way that's going to have the impact that we believe it will. But guess who does have that audience? Our global network of dealers and distributors. And guess what? They will practically sell anything that they can make a margin on. All right. And I'm not saying, that to kind of devalue what they're doing, but they're really dialed in at creating audiences and pulling together a number of components to create a solution. And so they were hyper focused on how do we pull together all of this gear and package it in a way that's attractive to the work from home professional, or trying to make parents support their children easier from a distance learning perspective. And there's so many things that our partners were doing, and that I said, let's just help them see where we fit into that, right? And so that's where our sales team did a tremendous job of making sure that different pieces of our gear were in different kits and bundles. And now we're part of that solution. And they weren't buying Tether tools, one of our flagship brands per se. They were buying that solution. But for me to try to get them to understand our value proposition and our brand value, it would have been too big of an ask, and we weren't going to be able to do that while staying the course that we were on to honor our brand value and brand position with our core customers, to say, let us help you figure out how you can still be a professional photographer and videographer, which is predicated on people being together in a world where people aren't coming together. Right. And, we were able to, show those solutions, find some of our kind of pro influencers and another great pros that we work with who were, solving that issue and taking that out to more people. And that, was a great way for us to say, how do we help this industry rise at a time where there's so many people thinking, I don't know if I'm ever going to take another photo. And so, that's where you have to be creative in finding that solution. That doesn't always mean you have to, you know, move away from who you are at the core.
I love that. Now I want to switch direction a minute because for the most part, our conversation has been about how organizations add value to other organizations and create revenue. But all the things you've talked about, my sense is they're every bit as important when we're trying to recruit and keep recruit new employees and keep the current ones we have. Because when you set that expectation, when you make that brand clarity, when you create that alignment, my guess would be it makes people clear about why they want to work for you and then how to be a good team member. Does that fit with what your experience is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to that idea of alignment, and alignment has to start internally. I mentioned imaging brands and tether tools. The goal of our organization, Imaging Brands is a parent company. Tether Tools is our flagship brand. We're about to take another brand, relaunch another brand that was acquired into market probably in August called Frio. And our goal is to really grow through creating new brands and acquiring brands that help kind of honor the value proposition that as a parent company we want to deliver on among our core audience through all of the brands that we take to market. And last year when we started to talk about this new brand Frio and how we were going to relaunch it and how we were going to start to shift towards having and interacting with our partners as imaging brands, I was really a champion of saying, well, how do we get our team internally to see themselves as imaging brands first, right? And what does that mean for them? And in a company where it's small and everyone's imaging brands and tether tools and Frio, hopefully someday that's not the case and we have more dedicated teams to each of those, but that's the reality today. But unless we start to have them believe it like for themselves and see how that's the expectation of everybody, we're not going to get people externally to believe it, right? And so and there's a ton of course correction along the way, right? From getting people to use the right email signature. And even yesterday I was looking at an internal communication and it wasn't imaging brands branded, and I said, well, this is a great email. I love it, right? You did great constructing it. The flow of it is perfect. The communication is going to be effective, but the brand's the wrong brand, right? And so it's just small things like that where you constantly have to kind of remind people, because their day-to-day is externally trying to get our customers to interact with our brands, but we have this whole other component of the business internally and with our partners that have a different set of expectations, and so there's a lot of time and attention that has to be placed on that. And it's probably sometimes to with my executive team, the first question I always ask is, how are we communicating this? And a lot of times that goes along with, how are people going to feel when they hear this? Because we can't negate that, because we are all human, right? Yep. And sometimes I'll be honest and say, I feel uncomfortable with what this information is. It's different than the expectation I had. And so it's a shift in thinking for me. And my part of a big piece of my job is to, change management, get people to think differently, get people to adopt new worldviews, new ways of thinking. So if it's uncomfortable for me, I can only imagine what it's going to be like for the rest of the organization that we're trying to shift along with us. And so it's important to have those conversations, and it's important to hedge that off, because once you start to lose alignment, that's where you start to lose engagement. And, once you start to lose engagement, you have a lot of challenges that, are not at all related to, are we bringing in revenue and are we, closing more deals? And so, that's where it's not a chicken or egg scenario. It's, you have to have that alignment internally, that engagement internally, because then that's the environment through which you can start to have a successful interaction and connection with your customer base.
Matt, one thing I really liked about that, and it just kind of woke me up a bit, was, as you were talking about adding the third brand and things as simple as, the email signature box and so on and so forth. It really made me realize that the structure and the discipline and the expectations and alignment are necessary to continuously improve your process. So that whatever you're doing today, you're laying a foundation with teachable, trainable, repeatable things that when you start to see the world change, you can start to modify, some fairly small pieces that can have a big impact. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. You sort of gave me a little bit of a roadmap on that in talking about, these pillars of strategy and infrastructure and deployment, right? And they're all critical. And you can't have a clean deployment piece without the right infrastructure, and you don't know what infrastructure to create without the right strategy. And that infrastructure component is one that not enough people spend time on, and I think that's what I've really chosen in a lot of my roles to focus on. And it's infrastructure that cascades outside of marketing, because what I found is you can't build and scale when there's that chaos, and when you don't have sort of like that safety net of the core process and the core protocols in place. And that doesn't have to mean bureaucracy. It doesn't have to mean having a lot of red tape. What it means is it has that set of expectations. And within my current team, I always talk about we need to have this strong foundation in place of how we market, so that we create muscle memory around it, right? Because once we create that muscle memory, it becomes second nature. And now we can free up our brain space to tackle bigger issues that help us, approach the market differently, do some experiments that are outside of that core operating rhythm, and then kind of find that next stage of growth, and ways that we're going to scale the business. But it really starts with having that right foundation in place, and that goes along with having the right strategy, making sure that your brand narrative is reflected through all the touch points that the consumer or the customer is going to interact with, the systems that support delivering that consistently out in the marketplace in a way that you can also measure. And then, ultimately through the deployment, are you reaching those people who are going to find that value, right? The right buyers, who, the light bulb goes off for them, right? There's a solution that solves a problem that I have, rather than them feeling like you're convincing them that they should buy this product, because no one wants to be convinced. People will know as soon as they see it.
Yeah, and I mean, we could talk all day, but one of the things you just said in there that I think is so important that people don't think about until kind of it's over, and that is when you get it that simple and you repeat it consistently, then all of a sudden your customers can carry your message also, because it's consistent, it's aligned, they've seen it, they've experienced it with you, and now they can share it with either peers or their boss or their team. And then you all of a sudden have all these other humans who are helping you advance their world and yours.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've always stated that all marketing really is word of mouth marketing, right? It's the word of mouth is the most valuable thing when it's good, is one of the most valuable things you can do for your organization. And almost all marketing and sales is trying to facilitate that in a positive way. It's trying to create that understanding so that you can find that champion. They can champion your message. If it's 5.6 or 6.7 or 15 buyers, right? Like nowadays, like you're trying to facilitate dialogue that gets them all to see how there's a common problem, there's a clear solution, and ideally your business is the one that can offer that. And that's sort of in a bigger business sort of scenario, when you have those multiple buyers, in my current world, most of our buyers are sole proprietors, right? I'm trying to, talk to one photographer about how they need to introduce a piece of gear into their technical workflow that helps them achieve these tremendous creative photographs, right? And I once had one of our stakeholders and pros explain to me how, the value he sees in our brand is, he knows where he lives with aggravation every day. Something doesn't work, or, like a piece of something that he tried to put together that he thought was going to streamline his setup really is, not that durable. And he said, the things that you guys come out with, I look at it and I say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And he goes, I could go out and probably redo the same thing, but you've already thought about it, and so, and you made it easy for me. And I get that piece or that component. I know it's going to work, and I know it's going to be durable. I don't have to go build it myself. And, one of my colleagues, talks about how, the belief among photographers and videographers is if there's a camera in their hand, they're making money. If there's a mouse in their hand, they're not losing money, but they're probably eroding their profit, right? And so what we're trying to do is say, how do we keep the camera in their hand as much as possible, minimize the amount that they're doing in the post production and that, the more the administrative work, so that they can be, thriving, profitable small businesses and sometimes large businesses, all right, depending on, how they, grow their client base.
Well, Matt, this has been spectacular. I have one last question for you. And that is, as you think of the 2020 and first third of 2021, from a marketing standpoint, what did the pandemic kind of teach you or remind you that you'd like to share with everybody else?
I think it kind of goes back to what I was stating about my style of marketing, which is kind of predicated on connection. And I think that what the pandemic reminded us is that at the core, humans thrive on connection, right? And that's with their colleagues, with their family. And, it's amazing how, so many people have, anytime you're interacting with somebody, whether it's on, a computer screen like this or in person, that's when you see people light up. And I think marketing has to be focused on how are you creating moments where people light up. And that, like, idea of lighting up could be, how you bring people together in some kind of like relational component, or it could be just like that light bulb going off, right? You're sharing ideas, you're helping them understand your worldview and your purpose and how it impacts their business and day-to-day lives. And that kind of idea then sets off the light bulb and then can cascade through their organization. And it's really kind of about, creating this energy and enthusiasm. And I think that, the more as marketers, we can help create enthusiasm among our customers around our products and services, and then ultimately for our brands and our business. That's where, we find a lot of success. We find a lot of long-term customers, and it becomes a lot more fun. And I think that's where all businesses should strive to be.
Well, Matt, that's a great way to put that. And I love the concept of helping light people up for the moment and the fact that it should be fun. I mean, great companies, typically the employees are having fun, the customers like engagement with them, and everybody's winning. And so
Yeah.
that's a real great close to this interview, because you and I could go for another hour if we wanted. But I just want to thank you in particular. This was really good. And everybody for joining us today, and welcome everybody back in the future for the continuing podcast series on living a revenue culture. Thanks, Matt. Great interview.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Yeah, always great to talk to you.